house. It's tougher to work downstairs.
I know. I've banished my whole crew upstairs. I'm like,
Oh
if you
yeah.
come downstairs, I'll kill you.
That's it.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm getting like a new door, and I'm gonna put in some soundproofing, and
Yeah, we moved in this space, and it's great because I have a main floor office instead of being in the basement. But the thing is that I'm actually now in a room at kind of the front of
windows.
the house with no door and a huge window, so like if a car drives by. Anyways, we're now live on YouTube, so let's actually address those people
Exciting.
who might be tuning in here, not just randomly dropping in like a fly on the wall for our conversation. This is actually a live recorded episode of the Clarinet podcast. This is the second time I've tried this. Last week was with the wonderful Pablo Barragan, who was in Spain. And today I'm here with Susanna Klein, and you're down in Richmond, Virginia. Is that right?
Yep, I am.
I have a
I'm so
friend who
excited
lives
to be
down
here.
there. Yeah, and for those watching, tuning in right now, if you could just comment in the comments, make sure that you can actually hear both of us. If one of us is cutting in and out or something, just let me know. That'd be really helpful. We're also going to do a live Q&A at the end of today's conversation. So I'll give a little bit of a reminder here and there as people are tuning in about that. And also, I just want to say too that you'll be used to me in a different location of my room, but this kind of does lead into the conversation today. But I'm doing a huge clean of my office. So those of you who tuned in a while ago know that I recently read the book, The Magic of Tidying Up or something like that by Marie Kondo. And great book, great read, but I'm just kind of reaching stage like 10 of that. And
Wow.
I'm in my new house and I'm like, this is the final stage. I'm going to be super organized. I can show my drawers to the queen when she comes over, if she does. It's going to be that organized. But the last stage of that, I've got everything ripped out of my drawers and I'm just like totally reorganizing my office. So I was not able to actually move over to my usual space today. So today we get to sit here and look at my fish tank
Fish. I
instead.
love it.
So
I
also
love
it's
it.
super hot here today. So I'm sorry for my
Yeah,
informal
here too.
attire, but man, it's really hot. And also check out this shirt, guys. She has a little chapter in here on designing a fun shirt. So I decided to wear one of my fun shirts. And this is now available on the new clarinetshirts.com website. And you can get 10% off with the code Clarinet at checkout. So you can check out all the different new fun shirts I have in there. So why are we on video today? Well, one reason is because it's fun. Second reason is because I actually want to show people this cool book, which I have here. So Susanna was nice enough to send me this in the mail, and it's a new journal called Practisma. And it's a 16 weeks of efficiency, empowerment, and joy. I like that last part there. It goes well with the whole Marie Kondo theme I've started off with today. And, Susanna, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about this book. But I just want to say that this has found me at the perfect time because I think that, we're all in isolation right now. And I'm just about done my office. And just yesterday, as I was cleaning, I thought, what am I going to do when this is all done? Like I've now reached a point where I'm going to have to get better at my instruments because my space is so clean. There's no more
No,
excuses. Like I got to
right, right,
organize my junk drawer. So let's just start
right.
off. You're not a clarinet player, so we got to get to know who you
I
are on
am
the
not.
podcast here.
I'm not a
And then
clarinet
we'll
player,
dive in.
but I'm married to one, so that's a close
Oh,
second.
I'm sorry to hear that. No,
which is which is how I knew about your podcast.
that's right. That's right.
No, I'm a violinist. I live in Richmond, Virginia. I teach at a university called Virginia Commonwealth University. Um, and I'm not a Richmond native, but I've lived here 3 separate times. And so now it's definitely home for me. And I I've done various things, played symphony stuff full time, taught full time, done like most people, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, kind of cobbling it all together. And sort of my new, I don't know, accidental passion, I guess, is, working on practice and practice psychology and kind of the practice space, which I think was always important to me personally, but I didn't really get that it resonated with other people until I started doing some projects, and then people sort of accidentally asked me for, oh, you're doing this with your class, or you're doing this with your studio. Can I borrow some of that? Can you send me some of those Google Docs, or can you send me some of that stuff? And then I started thinking like, wait, is this the kind of thing that could be important to other people? And so I've sort of, accidentally found myself here. And the fact that the journal came out right before Christmas, Thanksgiving last year. And I mean, this is sort of accidental, right? That now we are in this time of just gluttony of time for most people, for most musicians, but no deadlines, no structure, no sense of time really within our own work. And I think, that's just serendipity that the journal kind of addresses some of those things by giving little piecemeal, this week do this, next week do that. But I didn't write it for coronavirus time. That was just completely accidental.
Well, and what I find interesting about it too is, and so after our conversation today, I'm actually going to start my own journal, which I have right here, and I'm going to use it though for my guitar practice, because one of the things that I've always struggled with a new instrument like clarinet, for me, it comes much more naturally. But I shouldn't say that, because I've been playing it for since I was basically 10 years old or something, right? So starting another instrument like guitar 5 or 6 years ago, like I did, I lacked that sort of same time commitment and structure to my practice, simply because I'm older, right? And now, we got a 2-year-old upstairs, and then I got the job and a
That
podcast
changes
and
everything.
lots
Yeah.
to do. So I'm excited to see how this will help kind of shape my practice routine. But could you dive into some of the main, first of all, what's the meaning of the word practisma? And second, how is this book organized to help us out
Organized.
with this journey?
So Practisma is, of course, like totally made up. And that was also sort of an accident, except that it helped me solve a problem. So when I was thinking about putting this book together, and I should back up a little bit, the book is kind of the result of, I don't know, 8 or 9 years of journaling with my students in the studio. And we can dive into kind of where that came from in a second. But when it came time to really get serious and choose what I thought were some of my best prompts that could also apply to all instruments, that was sort of important. I needed a name, and I needed also a name for a website. And I kept talking to people about 3 concepts, which is efficiency, empowerment, and joy. And those were kind of the 3 things that I was interested in cultivating. But of course, it always took me talking a long time about these things. Like, oh, this is what I want. Do you know what I mean? And then eventually I realized, like, I need to actually have a name for it, and I need it to be a unique name, and it should have something to do with practice. And I don't know exactly how it popped into my head, but at the time I was like, oh, Practisma or Practismo. Those were the 2 things I thought of. And I ran them both by my 2 kids. I said, tell me what you think when I say this. And I said Practisma, and one was like, oh, that sounds cool. It's kind of like charisma, but with practice. And I said, what about Practismo? And he was like, no, definitely not. Sounds macho, sounds gimmicky, whatever. And I was like, okay, deadline's tomorrow. This is what it is. So that was kind of just a fun thing, you know what I mean?
Did you
To have
find that
sort of
it
a
was
title.
kind of leading you in the right way too, to discover that like the web domain was available and other people liked it and that kind of
Well,
thing?
exactly.
Yeah.
Now because so many domain names are taken up, you don't have choices that maybe you did 10 years ago, right? So like the very first thing I thought of, which is now I'm like, why did I think of that? That was really cheesy, was practice bliss. As if we're all going to get to this blissful state. Practice is great, which is not the point at all. But, if you, I put in practice bliss in like the Google search engine, and it produced 76 million hits.
Oh, wow.
And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, maybe not.
Yeah, this stuff is important, and I love the word practisma in the sense of practisma. I keep saying it wrong, but it's a unique word. It's a cool brand. It's easy to remember once you've learned it the first time. And I guess I had the same experience with Clarinet, because
Clarinet,
originally
exactly.
I was going and I was looking at domain names, and I had the choice of buying Clarinet or Clarinerd. Same thing. I told my wife, and she's like, "No,
Not nerd. Yeah.
don't do the
Right.
Clarinerd one. That's not a good one." But Clarinet's cool. And I
Yeah.
couldn't believe that it was still there. And that for me was like okay, green light, let's go in this direction.
Yeah.
And I've since
Exactly.
become very bad actually at domain camping, which is I come up with something, I'm like, I
Ooh,
can't believe it's there. So
second
like,
income stream.
well, yeah, I mean,
So I
I
was
own
gonna.
like Clarinet Hacker and Clarinet Shirts and all these other weird different
Oh,
domains.
nice. That could be a whole nother
Anyway.
income stream.
But yeah, let's get
So
into
then,
the
how it's organized. So
yeah.
it's 16 weeks, which I know is kind of long. And having actually tried to do 16 weeks in a row myself, I'm ashamed to admit I fall off the bandwagon. I have to take a week off every once in a while because I just can't deal with like the steadiness of it. But the idea was that's a long stretch of time, slightly longer than a semester, is to really build some new habits in practice.
Mm.
And we know from like habit research that this, building new habits takes a while, and like 16 weeks is about kind of where that stands, give or take. So the book has kind of 4 main components always. One is for every week. It has a reflection prompt, that's a question, writing something down about music. It's they're pretty open-ended, different ones. I try to have different styles. One is an action prompt: go do something to learn, go play for somebody else, learn a different way, score study, do mental practice. Then there's a
Here we are.
then there's
Just for
a
those watching.
yeah, yeah, and I can read one if you want. And then goal setting. So every week there's some goal setting. What are kind of your big goals for the week? I ask people to choose a process goal and what I call a big dive goal, like something you want to change in your playing, you want to make a big dent into, and something that you want to change about your process. Because if we change our process, right, we get different outcomes as opposed to just practicing more. Um, and then of course there's space to kind of write however much you want about, keeping track of practice. And some people write a lot and are very detailed. Oh, I worked on these measures and for this long I used the metronome or whatever. And some people just are once over lightly. But I have these little acronyms to just keep track of certain things, inspired kind of by bullet journaling. But like M is for when I use the metronome, T is for when I use the tuner, P is for pain, if you had any pain, because I think that's really important to keep track of. What are my other ones?
And that's just
AR,
physical pain, not mental pain of the practice.
We always feel mental pain that you don't even have to keep track of that.
Yeah.
AR if you recorded yourself audio, VR if you recorded yourself video. Yeah, and that's it. So that you're keeping track of, good habits that you're having rather than this is how I sounded. So that's how I kind of meant for it to be laid out. But everybody uses it in a different way. And then next week, it just kind of repeats. Different prompts, but trying to play on a different strength or a different balancing of emotion usually, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But the format is kind of the same. So there are 4 pages for each week.
Well, and for those watching, I know you can't hear this later on the podcast, but I just wanted to show you kind of what these pages look like. And it's really interesting because a few years ago, actually, when I was teaching a lot, I had a similar concept. I had this sort of book that I would give students. I would make them use it. That's why I found when you sent me this, I was actually super interested in it because I had a fledgling idea like this, but nowhere near taken as far and nowhere close to this sort of level of annotation and concepts.
Well, you're seeing it after like 9 years, right? So my students all had like the ugly version of that, like the PDF spiral bound. Do you know what I mean? And then it developed over the years. In the beginning, I just did reflection prompts, and then I started doing action prompts, and then I did every other. So that's why you'll see in the beginning of the book, it's kind of dedicated to my students because they really helped me understand what is meaningful and what is not just meaningful, actually, but actually stupid. I had some prompts pretty early on that were like, record an hour of your practice. You know what I mean? Sit down, transcribe it, write down what you learned. I mean, that's crushing. Like that's not joyous at all. That might be very highly efficient, but that's really not a great way to go. So they, over the years, kind of, I learned through them, oh wow, this had a big influence on a student, or this was just a tiny little thing, like just to give somebody a prompt like record yourself, but only pay attention to dynamics, and nothing can be more than 12 bars or something, or 16. I guess I should make it even. That if you guide it in the right way, people will enjoy the work much more. They'll get a lot more out of it, and they'll still be getting a lot done, but they won't be crushed under the weight of it.
Well, I think something like this, a structure is important. And I wanted to ask you if you feel that any people should be or are using this as kind of a teaching tool in their studios for all of their students to have. Because what I used to do, I'm not teaching that much anymore, to be honest. And when I am, it's usually a little bit older kids. But I was using my little books, and I would have everyone write down a goal for each semester. Like by the end of the semester, you had to perform, X piece, or maybe you had to record a duet with me or with yourself and learn how to use the software or something like that. And I found that not only was this more encouraging for me as the teacher to know kind of what each student's goal was, but it also helped keep the student on track. Because if you just come to lesson every week, you get your lesson, you go home and you go back to World of Warcraft and soccer and every other 10,000 activities kids have these days, it's hard to stay focused on your music. So have you found that this is something that people should be using or are using?
Yes.
Or
There are teachers. Yeah, there are teachers who've just adopted it for the whole studio, and they're like, okay, the whole studio is doing it. Some of them are sharing that work, like in masterclass. Do you know what I mean? Where there's a
Hmm.
kind of sharing sort, and some are not. It's just a private kind of thing, and it gives the students some structure. So that's definitely happened. I think some teachers are also using some of the prompts individually. For now that we've transitioned to online, and it looks like in the fall, right? Most music schools, I think, are going to be online again, or have a heavy online component. I think some people, I've heard also from some colleagues and friends, oh, do you mind, can I use this one prompt for like a masterclass activity or like a masterclass challenge, right? There's some trying to think if I have like an action
Well, you did say
prompt like
this is sort of a social element to this. So do you have some kind of online Facebook community or something where people can interact and feel part?
um oh, see, all the things I didn't think of. So I have an Instagram account.
Okay.
um I have a Facebook, page, but I don't have it populated very well. I did put in the book. No one's done it, but people do post about the book, but they don't use. I meant originally, I was like, oh, if you want to share, you can use my Practisma as a
Or like a
hashtag.
hashtag, yeah.
Yeah, but I haven't seen any, so I don't know what that means. But people do will tag me, or will just tag at Practisma. Um, do you know what I mean? And some of them are quite public about their work, other ones more private or whatever. But anyway, but I was going to read you like one. So this might be a thing that like a teacher, you know, I haven't heard of this particular one being adopted, but this could work for like a masterclass setting for a challenge, right? It's called Faux-formance. So this is an action prompt, week 9, if anyone's interested. Arrange a mini performance for playing for an audience. In other words, a minimum of 2 people, but the more the merrier, in a large room or hall. Obviously now Zoom.
Yeah.
Your goal, your goal is no stopping, no self-deprecating, no apologizing. Put your performing hat on all the way. Concentrate on what you can control from your previous week's list. So it's following up on another prompt, but practice your acting. In other words, looking like a performer, your breathing, your physical language, everything you need for the stage. Get into a hall if you can, because this will help you. This will help make it feel real. Afterwards, tell your audience what you were trying to do. Ask them, did this feel like a real performance to you? Reflect on the experience in the space below. So I think teachers are kind of borrowing one thing or another that appeals to them, that's appropriate for their level, and saying, okay, class, for next week, this is our challenge. See you Friday. Report back how it went. So
It's
kind of
like you can
happening
read my
both ways.
mind because that faux formance was one I was actually going to explicitly talk to you about a little bit because I love that concept. And, it's so funny because I have this is a little bit maybe stupider, but I have this concept that I tell young kids. I call it the practice gnome. And you want to just pretend that across the room in the corner, there's this little gnome that has to write down everything that you do. And then afterwards, it shows it to you to ask if it was right. And so, I mean, if you're playing everything
That's
mezzo forte,
that's
it's not
brilliant.
gonna it's he's gonna go, well, I don't know, he doesn't have the score, right? He just has to write down what he hears. And he's always perfect.
Yeah,
So you have
that's
to
great.
show your piano to forte. Was it staccato? I don't know, what does he
Yeah,
say,
no,
right?
it's
So,
great. A teacher in graduate school used to say to me, "You have to put your ears out in the back of the hall, and
yeah,
you have to pretend that you're hearing yourself from far away, rather than like right here."
I think it's
Yeah, it's
important to
kind of
tell
the
them the
same
gnome has an
concept.
on-off switch too, so that it doesn't
Yeah,
just freak them out later.
and like there are a couple things that I feel like, so there are performing actions in there. There's some challenges like that, but there are a lot of other ones like mental practice, or score analysis, or practicing a different way, or record yourself every day 2 times, before and after. I tried to get a mix of things, again, kind of going with the theme that practicing. Okay, now this is my own sort of personal view of the world, I guess, or of practicing, is that I feel like practicing is sort of the quintessential activity of balancing or regulating our emotions. Like
Hmm.
this is what I really feel like the value is of it. Um, and in society we have terms for it. We call them virtues, right? So patience is like having the strength to wait. Well, we need that for practicing for sure, right? Or being steadfast, being open-minded, taming your ego, being self-critical, right? Which we need. or being brazen or courage, which we also need. Like we have all these things. When we practice, we have to do all of them. Not at the same time, but kind of in succession. And so like my action prompts, the variety of what I chose, I just tried to get different ones that would call on a certain thing. Like I didn't say, today you're developing curiosity, but you probably saw there's some that are written in such a way so as to promote curiosity, right? To kind of build that strength out a little bit. And then there are others that have to do with courage. There are others that have to do with, being optimistic or being steadfast kind of thing. Because I feel like underneath, I think what is difficult about practice, besides being such a long arc for where we don't see, it's actually perfect, this picture right now. So my arm is like going out of the picture. Like that's what's really difficult about practice, right? Is that the goal you cannot see, you can't see the arrival. And it's always, the arrival is always moving. But besides that, it's just that you're dealing with yourself and your emotions and all the time. And great practice necessitates you being slightly uncomfortable.
I like that. And I love at the beginning of the book too, when you talk about, I think the term you use is the reality dream gap. And I found this so interesting because I also believe that one of the hardest parts about being a musician is finding joy in the journey and realizing that there is no destination. And that's something that goes for someone all the way from Glenn Gould to a very beginning student. And you don't realize it because when you're on the journey and you're, moving around, the horizon's always the same distance, no matter how far you've traveled, right? And I think that philosophy comes from a book called The Practicing Mind, which you may have also
I have not read it, but now I'm gonna
Yeah,
put it
very
on my
good
list.
book.
I listened to a podcast episode of yours where you had some book recommendations, and I've already digested two of them. So
Oh, really? I don't remember doing
yeah,
that. Maybe it was
yeah,
I've been meaning to do something like that for a while, but maybe I should check. I might have already done it.
yeah. I can't remember who you were talking to, but it was
Yeah.
you were talking more about sort of podcasting and being an entrepreneur, being in business for yourself, like that part of it, or whatever. So anyway,
So, but can you tell me a bit about this whole reality dream gap? Because I mean, this is something that I
it's endless.
experienced this
Yeah.
frustration to practice. And you say in here too, it's something that really resonated with me because I feel this so much lately. Like, honestly, people who've been following the podcast for a while, they know my life has changed since I started this show. Like, I used to be a relatively recent music grad, just starting out my career, looking for kind of an interesting opportunity. And then I had a bad hand injury and like I moved several times and now we have a kid. Like, I don't have the same kind of time that I used to have, for example, And so, coming to practice feels like something that I have to do for myself, but yet there's often such what's the word, like a discouragement or almost resentment towards needing to sit down and work on these things. So
Because
how
because you can't be your ideal musician self. Like, is that the
probably I think that I sit down with the guitar, for example, because that's what I'm going to be using this book for. But I sit down and I have these ideas in my head and I can't get them into my guitar. And so then
right?
you have to go back and slog through 3 months of arpeggios and before you can realize your idea. And that's
I
hard.
mean, yes. So like practice inherently is, I'd like to do this, but I can't do it quite yet, right? So that
Hmm.
setup already is it it bakes in some frustration. But but I think the goalpost is always moving, right? Because as soon as you achieve that, of course, you want something else, and as soon as you achieve that, you want
Exactly.
something else. And the people that we surround ourselves are part of this too, right? So you might have a goal of like, oh, I want to be first chair, I want to get into this group, and then you're in it, and we find immediately a way to say, well, you know. I got in because it's actually not so good. I need to be in this other group, and I think some of that, like, I mean, I'm still you know I'm still treating myself, I like to say, psychologically. But when I graduated and then I got a temporary job, then I went back to school, then I got another job, then I got another job, I kept thinking that that sort of my anxiety or my angst about practicing and about the process was just, at first I thought it was that I couldn't stomach the idea of unemployment.
Mm,
Then I thought it was that I couldn't stomach the idea of, not being in a better orchestra or whatever, like these sort of goals that we set ourselves. But each little thing, each milestone, for lack of a better word, that I achieved, I felt no different.
mm,
I didn't feel, like when I moved from the Richmond Symphony to the Colorado Symphony, in my mind, I was like, oh, it's an Ixam orchestra. It's a bigger orchestra. It's, I will have arrived, you know. And there I was in my same sort of miserable, somewhat miserable relationship with my instrument. Let's call it just love hate with my instrument and that process and practicing, because you're always aiming up. It's part of, what you're doing. It is the journey itself, that it's not the quest for the Holy Grail. The journey is the Holy Grail. And I think only by teaching and kind of seeing it in others and teaching so much was I able to kind of say, oh, this is not my problem. There's nothing wrong with me. This is actually completely normal. And every musician goes through this. I think before I was sort of pathologizing it, like, what's my problem? Why can I not be happier? And why am I often dreading this? And
That's
now I
actually
think
something I was going
more,
to ask you. Is sort of interrupt, but like, was this hard to? I don't mean this like in a super personal way, but like, was this hard to admit at first before you realized that other people were experiencing the same thing? Because I imagine that most people
oh,
listening feel
yes.
this way, but they're very cautious to like tell their teacher, "Look, I feel um, I'm never satisfied with
Yes.
you know."
Yes, and I think that's all over the music industry. Don't admit when you're in pain, don't admit when you hate it, all these things, because you're not a true musician. I mean, I felt for a long time even weird about repeating any kind of repertoire, right? So the
Hmm.
idea of doing a recital, which is kind of a big goal or big thing, I think, when you're teaching full time, especially, it's like I felt that pressure to do all new music to me, as if the only way that I was a good musician is if I did a completely new program.
Yeah,
That's
where does this come
lunacy.
from?
And
Like, why does this happen though? I mean, because if you see touring artists, great artists touring around on things, they're usually playing a defined set list or some combination of the set list wherever they go. And this is everything from rock bands
yeah,
to touring chamber ensembles. They go on a tour
and
to
they will tell
promote.
you that that's where the
Yeah.
growth is, and do you know what I mean? That's obviously that's essential. But I just mean, like, sort of even creating these kind of little litmus tests for us, for ourselves. Oh, this is what it means to be a true musician.
Hmm.
If you're not
Yeah.
happy. And I think that's why we don't admit how hard the work is. But if you're doing it well, the work is hard, right? Because the best practice is like a discovery jaunt. It's not I'm clocking in, at the gym like
Yeah. And
this,
this is
right?
something
And
else I
so
wanted
if
to.
you're really discovering things, that can be quite difficult. If you're recording yourself, I mean, there's nothing harder, I think, still to me, than recording myself and listening
Oh
back.
yeah, listening
Gets a little
back.
easier if you have good equipment, but still, it's hard.
Well, and this is another concept I find really kind of interesting in your book and for practicing in general is that you talk about I wish I could remember the exact words you use, but sort of goal and achievement oriented practice instead of time oriented practice. Like you don't just clock in at 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock and practice for 2 hours. You want to get something
Hmm.
done, and if you get done earlier, then you've kind of achieved it. Can you talk a bit about that and maybe why one way or the other might be better sometimes?
Yeah, well, I mean, just in general, and I know teachers say this, but discovering something new with your ears
Hmm.
or with your hands, that's progress. That's the most efficient way to learn. Clocking in and repeating is just not efficient, and it just actually drains down the body, right? With like a lot of people get injured through that. I don't think I was really good at that in school. I just practiced until either my lips became numb, which is, I'm embarrassed to admit now, like I would just do that, or until I couldn't do it anymore. I'm not sure. I think sometimes I was practicing well and sometimes I wasn't. Once I had kids and like a full time teaching job and other things, I did become more and more efficient, and more goal oriented. And then, really, by doing this work with my students, I started applying this to myself, right? Like, okay, this week, spend 15 minutes of every day mentally practicing. You can do more than 15, but you have to do those minimum 15. And
Hmm.
it's like doing it for a whole week with the regularity. Wow, you get into some stuff, you get more comfortable in the space. You start to appreciate it more. You start to have to break it up for variety. Okay, I looked at the score, now I'm bored. I want to do something else. Okay, let me sit at the piano. Let me, I don't know, mark in dynamics. It's only by staying in that space a little bit that you actually grow. So that's where I really feel like this whole process, with students has kind of helped me. I feel like I'm a better practicer now, for sure, than I was before. And it's a good thing because I have less time, right?
Yeah,
But
and
what I think, sorry, but
it's okay.
what I think really surprised me is that it made the process more fun. I think that's the part that I didn't know before.
Yeah, and I think that too, when you find yourself with limited time, which is, not like right now for most people, it's kind of the opposite. But it reminds me of when I was just graduated. I was subbing a lot with the local orchestra, but I was now living instead of with my all my various friends in a like basically a house of like a bunch of guys. With any opportunity to go down to the university and practice, I didn't have that option anymore because I didn't have a key
Right.
card, right? So I was
Yes,
now
and you
living in
lose
a
that.
yeah, you lose the
Sorry, and
circle
you
of
lose that
social too.
structure. Exactly.
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 So I found myself with big scores of music that I'd only dreamed of playing. And now I was subbing with a professional orchestra. And I found myself in my little apartment. And I'm also a night owl. So it'd be like 11 o'clock at night. And I can't just bust out my clarinet and start practicing. So I was like, how am I going to learn these pieces? And the strange thing was, I found that by having less time and focusing it on intent listening and marking fingerings and getting it kind of into my hands without actually blowing air into the clarinet, the next day, if I did have a chance during the day, which obviously I still did, but I would play to be so much better. And I'm like, what? I could have practiced for 4 hours last night and not gotten this good. And I didn't even play a note last night. How could this be happening?
Yeah.
But that mental focus and the different kind of frame of reference, I think really helped.
Absolutely. And varying what you're doing, right? So that every day doesn't look the same. Because I
well, and
think,
it was more engaging. Yeah.
yes, engaging the brain, not just practicing with the fingers or,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your case, the lungs. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also
I think
there
the
comes a
monotony. Go ahead.
sorry, Skype is screwing up here.
Yeah.
We're talking over each other a bit, but no, I think too, like if I had practiced, it would have went something like this probably back then. I would have felt an urge to warm up. There goes 20 minutes. Okay, I should do some etudes or something. There goes 20 minutes. All right, now I'm going to do the stuff I have to practice for, this ensemble. And then you're tired and you're kind of bored or whatever. Whereas the other way, I just kind of dove into the music. I skipped all that other stuff and I
Right.
was able to kind of just get in there. So I think, yeah, varying it up is really important. Um, but I think that something like this is really going to help anybody to close this sort of reality dream gap thing. And I really do look forward to heading through this and I don't know, instead of taking it with a grain of salt, I'm going to take it with, what do you say? What's the opposite of that?
Don't take it too seriously. Don't take it too seriously. It's meant to just, it's meant to provide some structure and some variety. Because I think of all the things that are hard about practice, practice being boring is at the top of the list. I
Yeah.
think the monotony of practice, which isn't usually our best practice, but just the fact that most of us feel like we have to do some every day and blah, blah, blah. Boredom is the ultimate way of killing the joy, for sure.
Well, and how do let's talk a little bit about this current situation. I know we're diverting from sort of
Yeah.
the book here for a minute, but how do you think this book specifically could help people through this current situation? Because we mentioned that the timing of it was kind of, I don't want to say lucky, but it's worked out well because I think
Weird.
people are looking for
Mm-hmm.
something like this. But like, I know that myself, I originally started doing some online lesson type things at the beginning of this, thinking it would only last a week or two. And to my surprise, we're into the day hundreds now. And I just had to stop. I was tired and I was personally feeling quite down and all these people are talking about all this stuff they can achieve during this time. And for me, it was the opposite. I was feeling really miserable, feeling like we'd lost part of life that was normal. And I bet more and more people are kind of, I don't want to say depressed, but like they're not in a
Yeah.
good mood. There's nothing to practice for. Like we don't even know when a concert can resume again. So
Yeah, you have to practice. You have to essentially practice for the sake of practicing,
exactly.
which I really love. I really love that part of it, but I also don't make myself do a whole lot. Maybe I shouldn't admit that. Um,
So
I'm
how during
really
this
trying
time
to.
can we use your book to focus on getting better, even though
So I
so much
think,
is changing?
so I think when you have, so let's back up a little bit. So what happened when things went dark, right? And they're still dark, is that most of the things that govern human behavior, most of those incentives were gone in one fell swoop. I mean, this is a unique thing. There's actually,
Yeah.
I've written an article about kind of habits of practicing for Strings magazine, which is coming out in August, and it's sort of all about this. It's like, social structure, gone. Deadlines, gone. Sense of timing, so pacing, not just the actual deadline, but okay, on Thursday's rehearsal, we're going to work on this. In next Tuesday's rehearsal, we're going to work on this. Gone. No pacing. No benchmarks for how much you should do, right? Like a lot of things have just completely disappeared. So I think that's very disorienting to people in space. It's much easier to get something done if you have, let's say, 2 appointments a day or 2 lessons or whatever, teaching hours, than it is to have just absolutely nothing. I think that's really, really hard. But the biggest thing, I think, for musicians, whether we admit openly or not that we sometimes hate to practice and that we, have a complicated relationship with our instrument, is we've lost our sort of compatriots, like our army
Colleagues.
that surrounds us, right? So usually, let's pretend you and I are both in the same section. We might arrive, unpack, and then I might be like, oh my God, can you believe the 3rd movement? Like, I'm still not up to tempo, and we would make little self-deprecating jokes about our limits. And if you were a cool person, then you'll commiserate a little bit. Oh yeah, me too. I'm still working on it. And I mean, all of that's gone too, right?
Yeah.
So we
Small
just
talk.
exist lonely in this space with our limitations. So, habit building, there's some great books that I can recommend for that, for sure. But let me just
What are
give
they?
you
What are they?
the laundry list of like things to do. If you can make your goals specific by time and place. So I'm going to start practicing by practicing a little bit right after lunch. Or whether it's 1 o'clock or you're saying just after lunch or before dinner, but you're attaching it to something that already happens in this room or in these 2 rooms or whatever. And start small. If you're really out there floating with no habits or no regularity, aim for what you can do at a minimum, but that is regular. So half hour every day or hour every day. Not like I'm going to practice 5 hours a day and I'm going to learn all these pieces, et cetera, et cetera. Keep your expectations somewhere between overwhelming and super boring. Because we know that people who are in that zone, it's called like the Goldilocks rule, do a lot better. So, like for me, it would be, I want to work on the Chaconne and the Tchaikovsky concerto this summer. Not a good idea. Without my structure and like lessons and somewhere to go, probably not going to happen, but, aiming below that. Being accountable to one other person, and probably 1 is a good number, actually, not more than 1, works wonders. Like I've had students.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by accountable? Like you're meeting with someone online or like?
You can meet, right? So in the spring, when we were really flailing and it was very sudden, my students got very disoriented and depressed and anxious, as you can imagine. And so they made practice dates with another student online in Zoom. They would just meet in Zoom, audio off, muted, and practice. Like a practice date, which is actually possible because you can mute yourself. I think sometimes they would kill video, sometimes they would open it, and usually then they would talk, or maybe one, after a while, there would be trust and one would play for another. But just that single being accountable to one other person and time specific is miraculous. That's a really big deal. It shouldn't be accountable to, not like accountable to social media. I'm going to post every day. I mean, unless that's your thing and you're already in the space and you're used to it. But people on social media are not going to come find you when you don't post.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're like, oh, I'm doing a 100-day challenge, that's great. That's 100 days is a long time, by the way. But that's great. But if you reach day 14 and you don't post, it's very unlikely that somebody's going to text you and be like, hey, I'm missing your, day 13. Where is it? But if you pick a person that you like, trust, etc., and you're like, hey, I really need some accountability help, that will motivate you in a different way. So I had at the beginning of the summer, when I was the most disoriented in space, let me just say it that way, I got together with a friend of mine. She wanted to do live recordings, one movement of Bach, and put it out on the internet every week. and she wanted to run some files by, hey, can I run my recordings by you, whatever, just for some feedback, every week. I was like, sure. And then she said, actually, it would help me if you could do this with me. And I was like, with you, like I put out a movement of Bach, like out on YouTube every week? No way. I said, but I'll learn them with you, or relearn them as the case may be, and we can check in. And so I was helping her do this project, but basically towards the end of the week, I would send her my recording. She would send me hers, and instantly I was practicing. Very focused, very organized. It wasn't too much, but the reason was I was, supposedly helping her sort of have this accountability team, and it was great. It was great. We did it for weeks on end where I just felt like, oh, I can't stop practicing completely because I have to, we got to be able to talk about our stuff. Well, what are you doing in bar 3? What are you doing in bar 5? So you can, if you're trying to learn an excerpt or a piece, find somebody else who wants to learn something similar. I have a friend who's playing on her porch every day at noon.
Oh, I like that.
And her neighbors are out there every day. I've gone to play duos with. Sometimes she plays for 10 minutes every day at noon.
That's a fun idea. Yeah, some sense of normalcy is so important during these times. I guess I didn't realize, but in a way I've been doing this because a friend of mine at the beginning of this, actually in March, the last thing I did before this all started, my last kind of like outing that was normal, was I went for a meeting with a friend of mine because we were both interested in kind of songwriting, and we had no one to work with though, because like I'm a classical clarinetist. I don't know that many, guitarists at my level who want to talk that kind of thing, right? So we're both kind of beginners in that space.
Right.
But we went out and we're like, every week we're going to meet and try and go through some stuff. But then this happened. So we're like, well, let's just take it online. So we've actually been meeting every week except for one since this started. And just to, even if there's nothing to go over, we just like, all right, did you come up with a cool chord? Yeah. What is it? I don't know. Let's figure it out.
And actually accountability to like one other person is easier in Zoom, not harder.
Yeah,
because it used to be that we felt like you had to be in the same space. This is why I think, how when you're in school you feel like you have all that, you have like practice buddies, and then you graduate and you're like, oh my god, what's happened, right? And no weekly lessons, and but Zoom has made many things possible, just a standing date, or sometimes I geek out with a fellow violinist just on, hey, these are new things that I learned, and we just share. So just trying to give yourself some structure and accountability, not high stakes. It doesn't have to be high stakes because it's really about habitual and achievable, much more so than big lofty goals.
I think that's super important too. I normally save listener questions till the end, but there's a couple that are coming in here that are super relevant. And also, I can't believe it, but we've already been on for almost 45 minutes, which is just surprising. It goes by fast. It's a good thing. So, Michael, I feel like we might have just answered your question, but he's asking, what can we do to engage and encourage young players during this time? And I feel that although we kind of just answered it, young players face a specific set of challenges because socially things are so important for them. And they also, they have more difficulty, I think, suddenly adapting to this kind of craziness. I mean, one person was saying to me, okay, have you ever taken a course online? Have you ever, had to stay home completely? And basically everything we're going through now, have you ever had to do that at 8 years old? It's like, oh my God, no. And by the way, you're sharing your dad's laptop who works from home now too, so how can young players?
So I think the younger the player is, I'm going to guess, although it works for any age, the more specific and small of a prompt you can give them. I'm assuming this is maybe from a teacher, this question.
Yeah, I think he teaches.
But the more specific and light and engaging, I think the prompt should be. So, okay, your assignment for this week, obviously practice this stuff, and then check in with one other player who I guess you can assign. It depends on, how big your studio is or that, whatever, and play for that other person, and they play for you silently in Zoom. They don't get to hear you, and get them to tell you how convincing you were physically with your breath or your motions or whatever it is that, for string players, we have an advantage in that we're very physical, like you can see everything. For clarinet, right, you might have to have sound on, but just if it can be like something that is very small and very specific.
Hmm.
So, like sometimes I give my students assignments that are, you know, let's say record yourself. I think I mentioned this earlier. Only listen to dynamics. Write down
Hmm.
3 ideas, work on it. Okay, record yourself. Listen only to pitch. Write down 3 things you notice. You know what I mean? Bite-sized little things rather than record yourself for a long time. Or the same for mental study. Let's say mental practice, I guess. Um, you could just be like, analyze the score. Analyzing the score means how long are the phrases, what are the chords, blah blah. But that's too big. It's too generalized, right? Even for like I think probably college age. So the more it's specific and lighthearted, and by lighthearted I mean not high stakes. I don't know if that makes any sense. And high stakes, it depends on the student or the customer. I mean, there are some students who you can say, okay, form a duo, pick a performing challenge, and execute it. And, they might choose, if they're in school, playing over the intercom, if there is school, playing happy birthday for somebody, the principal over the intercom, right? Somebody else might choose to play for a relative. Um, some people could play for their dog. I found that the more specific you can make your assignment or your request, the easier it's going to go. Because people kind of go, well, I don't know who to play for. I don't know who, what's meaningful, or I don't know what to do. Like, you don't want to waste a lot of time with I don't know what to do, because when you propose something, and this is what I think the journal is good for in a way, you find things by accident that really work. I have also assigned in the studio duos, which I knew would create accountability. So just, you're going to learn the first part, you're going to learn the second part, you'll each learn it, then you'll get together in Zoom and talk about it. Hey, what's your tempo? And then eventually they just recorded a single track. Or one would mute themselves and and listen and play along with another player who is not muted, and then they would switch. Because you can play duos over Zoom. You just can't do it. One person has to be muted, so they're matching the other person.
Interesting. I haven't
So,
tried any of that kind of
but
stuff yet.
does that make sense? Like, as long as one person counts off, like, so you and we're talking over each other because there's a little delay, right?
Hmm.
But if I were to, 1, 2, ready, go, and I'm playing, you
Hmm.
could match me,
In my own
right?
space, it would sound like it
In
was.
your own space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You would sound together. And I wouldn't
Interesting.
know the difference because, if you're muted, I
Oh, you
can't hear
wouldn't be
that you're not
bothered
with
by it.
me.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's a way to get
And then you
around it, I
switch.
guess.
And then you switch. Or do like, games. I did a lot of studio games in the spring. That's mostly what we did with Masterclass. So like, name that Concerto Bingo. I did a lot of that kind of stuff where, I started a few bars I started a few notes, and they have to try and guess the concerto with as few notes as possible. So I start with 2 notes, then
Ooh,
three
that's
notes, then
nice.
4 notes, and then the students would do the same. I would say, okay, well, you guys know some concertos. Give us 2 notes with the most convincing way. And they had fun in that space, and it was light, but they were connecting.
That gives me a fun idea because I might have to steal it because I do
Yeah,
this thing called
absolutely.
musical Jeopardy at the university that I teach at, and they basically have like a group of young students come in for the day, and my class, which I'd proposed to them like several years ago, which has become more and more popular, but basically we just play musical games for an hour and a half with like a room
Mm-hmm.
of 30 kids, and they love it because they never get that chance just to let loose and have fun with their instruments, and that's kind of why I made it. But I have these various questions, and one of them is, you know how Jeopardy works, and
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly, I have to explain it to kids sometimes though, because it's not 1995 anymore. But but so I have this one column though that name that tune, and sometimes when they're easier numbers,
They love it.
they love it, but it's a little bit too easy. So it'd be actually more fun to be like name that tune, but I'm only going to play the first note, and then I'm going to play 2 notes, and if you get it, you'll get maybe bonus points or something with
Right.
fewer notes. But
And it's
this is what
great
makes
performance
practicing fun.
practice. And it's
Yeah.
great performance practice because if you can perform something easy, that is actually practicing for performance. And then, you start to perform harder things and harder things. I mean, it doesn't all have to be, that's again, high stakes or the ultimate, this is the piece I'm learning right now, so I have to perform this. There,
Yeah.
there are smaller steps in between that you can do. Or sight reading challenges, public. um, goofy stuff. The
Well, you know what
goofier, the better.
surprises
The
me
the
about
younger.
young kids surprised me lately because when I crafted that Olympics thing, for example, I first made it way too easy. And I knew that I'd have kids ranging from grade 7, 8, and 9, but I had no idea how much they would know. Like these kids can answer almost all the questions that they put out there. Like I'm trying to think
Wow.
of an example right now, but I'll even come up with something about, which composer was deaf or something, and they know instantly. And these are
Mm-hmm.
kids that haven't had formal they're just in band. They haven't had their normal, or sorry, formal, violin or piano lessons outside of band class. It's just what they've absorbed through
Yeah.
being in school. It's really quite impressive. But the fact that
And
it's
you can
fun and engaging, they learn.
exactly, and they learn to have also a good relationship that music is play, that not
Yeah,
just playing music is emotionally satisfying, but that actually learning music and dealing with other musicians can be fun. And don't forget to involve your students. I mean, I had to involve my students at VCU. It was all happening so quickly, and I was like, what should we do next week? For we would have sort of game Friday, and they had great ideas,
yeah,
and they would propose them and they would execute. I'm like, okay, you guys are responsible for that, and I'll see you there. And
yeah,
sometimes we just hang
yeah.
out and talk.
No, I actually had the same experience. I was asking the kids one time because I'd come up with a few games for them to play. Like we do Jeopardy, we do this, I call it long tone jump. We see who can play the longest tone, and we talk about
That's
why
that's great.
that's important. I mean, because a lot of kids, they've never tried. They don't want to sit at home with their metronome trying to get to 45 beats on the metronome. They want like
Yes,
it
but
turns it
they'll do
into
it with a group. They'll do it with a group.
exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
how a lot of really really hard work. That's what is surprising to me too. We
Hmm.
at VCU early on when I started sort of the journaling process, and I had gotten this grant at VCU that was all kind of what music can learn from sports. We did a lot of technology stuff like motion capture, bringing the violin students in the motion capture lab. And I was completely blown away because they had so much fun. And
Yeah.
all that was different was that they were seeing themselves as stick figures on a computer screen instead of looking in the mirror. But I was asking them fundamentally the same very patient things about, bow angle and stature and, can you make your string crossing a little bit smoother right here? But they weren't bored. They were fascinated and they were willing to engage in this actually kind of difficult small picture space because they were seeing themselves not the same old way. Like a friend of
Yeah.
mine says, refracted, when you perceive yourself in a different way, even though it's the same work.
That's super interesting. And I love the crossover of, science and technology and music. And I wish this happened way, way more, especially at the younger
Yeah,
levels.
this is where sports is way ahead of us,
Yeah.
way ahead of us. Both in terms of technology is huge, the different modalities of learning, and also of sort of espousing the virtues of sports and really talking about it in the right way. I think they're ahead of us too. Teamwork and resilience, and this is what it teaches you, and perseverance. And we don't talk like that about music. We
Yeah.
talk about, oh, isn't it wonderful, and to be talented, and
Oh, I'm going to beat you to first chair. Like,
yeah, right.
you
But
know?
like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this
But
has
I
been
think
absolutely wonderful. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was going to say, but I think as educators, like you and I know that, of course, like we're building all these things in students. We know that this is why music is correlated with positive outcomes in academics and self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. Like we sort of know that, but I don't know that we always talk about it, in those specific ways. I do feel like sports is way ahead of us in that, and kind of the love of the game, right? So you don't have to be the best badminton player, and you are allowed to be on the badminton court every
Yeah.
Wednesday night to have fun. Like there's value there.
Well, and a societal appreciation too. Like so many people get together to watch pro sports and love their kids to play in the team on the weekend, but to be in the band or something is still not quite as revered. And I think that that's going to be really obvious come the fall when we're going to notice, unfortunately, that a lot of the activities cut are going to be arts, music, things that really not only enrich society but also
Yeah.
allow to build teamwork in other ways for kids who, I'm sorry to say, but sometimes aren't interested in sports. I wasn't interested in sports,
Yeah,
but
same here.
I was in marching band, I was in school band, I was in all the things you can think of, and that had a lot of the same, I think, benefits for me that being in sports would have had. But if I didn't have that, I don't know where I'd be.
Yeah, yeah,
Wouldn't
yeah.
be here
Same.
sitting talking to you, that's for sure.
Yeah, same.
So who knows? Maybe be a brain surgeon. Maybe maybe it's a bad thing. Just kidding. But yeah, no, really great talking to you today. We did get a little off track, but I do want to invite all those listening to check out your book, Practisma. And I definitely think this is a great journal. And I love one thing about it, just before we go, is that the 16-week idea, I think right now, like we've been saying, is something super important because it does give you that sort of time frame to work in, which is otherwise it's a tough thing right now, as we were saying. So, but before we do go, I wanted to quickly ask if you had any more advice for players or any more comments about the book that you feel like we didn't get to touch on, and then we will do the lightning round.
Be kind to yourself. That's my big one. Like be charitable towards yourself in this time. I think I know the country is going through a lot, on many different levels, but I think for artists to be without, 80% of their usual process and trying to figure out how to have a meaningful relationship with their instrument, it will come. If you don't have it right now, if you're not having a great time, it will come. But be kind to yourself and be forgiving. And but do realize that I think regular practice, it does help it is so much of who you are. If you're listening to this, it's you're listening to it for a reason. It's part of who you are, and it is important. So like for me, I just try to work on the habit a little bit every day. Because it's like my meditation, it does help me. I realize full well that I haven't solved any of the world's problems after I practice, but it does
Yeah.
kind of, I am in that meditative space during that time when I'm doing it. Whether I play any better or not, not sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people too listening, I like that be kind to yourself thing because I think it also gives you the freedom or the ability to step back and realize that if this is not a productive time for you, that's also okay.
It's
Like this
okay.
is a
It'll come
stressful
back.
time. Like
Hmm.
the world is literally going crazy right now. So if you're not able to be your fully maximized self, then maybe that's
Right.
okay.
Join the club. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Join the
everyone's kind of
club.
in that boat, but this might let you
Yeah.
kind of find some joy and re-empower yourself to practice, which I really like. But there's also that
Awesome.
investment saying though, which is something like buy when others are greedy and sell, or no, sell when others are greedy and buy when others are fearful. And basically what that means is because when the markets are down, people are all trying to sell off their stuff, but that's the best time to get in because when it goes up again, you'll be out on top. So if you can look at it that way and you can get your practice time in now, maybe in a year or two when things get back to normal, you
Yeah.
can have something new to come back to.
And if you can discover new things, right? So we have all this space and we have mental space too. And if you
Yeah.
can take that as a time for discovery,
Yeah.
different ways of learning, I think that's good too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, those who are
Do you have any?
watching, we haven't got so many today. Must be because it's a nice day outside everywhere, it seems. But thank you so much for tuning in live here. If you do have any last minute questions, please do throw them in the chat there on YouTube. And I'll watch for them coming up here if they do. But otherwise, we're going to dive into the lightning round questions, which are a few bonus questions at the end of the interview here that I ask all guests. So are you ready?
I guess it's going to be difficult. I feel
It's
like
going to be
I'm
pretty
like,
easy,
okay, okay, good.
I think. So first one, who is your all-time favorite composer and why? I know it's
I
almost
have so
impossible.
many, but if I were ditched on an island forever and ever and I couldn't live without anybody else, probably Bach.
Mm, the desert
Because
island
there's
composer, I should call it that.
yeah, and I know for clarinet podcasts, this is like that's probably
Who?
not the
No, I'm just
composer you wanted to
kidding.
hear.
I'm kidding.
But just because he's so deep and there's such variety, I think right there that if I had to live a lifetime without any other composers, I think I'd be okay. But that doesn't mean he's my favorite composer. You understand the distinction?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
It's
interesting.
anyway.
Um, when you're not listening to classical music, what other genres and artists do you enjoy?
So my husband is a clarinetist, but he's like a jazz kind of rock pop guy.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's very good for me because he makes sure in a way that I hear other stuff, which I have to say is really good for me. And both my kids are musicians; they're teenagers, and they also they like classical music a lot, but they don't really play it, right? So one is a electric bass player, and one is a pianist.
You got the full band there.
Yeah, right. So I'm not sure that I listen to anything regularly, like sort of my own choosing, but I have stuff curated for me, if that makes any sense. So
Yeah.
they all create Spotify lists, and then I'm the beneficiary.
You end up hearing it anyways.
So probably a lot of rock, a lot of Beatles, a lot of sort of older, stuff.
Well, we'll have to talk
Jazz, some
afterwards about maybe
crossover.
having your husband on the show. That sounds super interesting. I'd love to talk to someone who's more, pop oriented like that or jazz. It'd be kind of.
Well, what's funny is he has a degree in classical clarinet, and it's education, and he doesn't use it. That's the only thing.
Next question is, what do you keep in your, I said clarinet case, but I'm not sure this question is fully relevant here. I guess maybe let's change it. What is something that you don't leave home without, musically speaking?
Oh, leave home without. Let's see. Probably my iPad.
Do you use it for music sheets?
I don't. It's a smaller iPad. I don't use
Yeah, me
it for
too.
sheet music. I want to get a Pro because I want to take the dive and all that stuff. I'm a little scared. I have a super cool practice mute that's a little violin-y that I like. But
Wish we had
I'm a
those.
huge fan of apps in practice. I think
So tell me about a
mostly
couple apps that you love.
Yeah, because they keep me from being bored. All right, hold on. Let me get my thing. What do I like? Tunable, which you probably know. Do you know that app?
No, I don't.
Oh my god.
Does that mean my tuning is quite bad?
No. It just means you're in for a pleasant surprise.
Oh.
So tunable. Somebody used to always tell me, "Oh yeah, you don't know the Juilliard app?" And I'd be looking for the Juilliard app, and it turns out it was tunable. It's like somebody meant, "Oh yeah, it's what everybody at Juilliard uses," but it's a tuner metronome recording device in one. And it's super geeky, so you can have both the tuner and the metronome going on at the same time, and you can like add and take away subdivisions. Do you know what I mean? Randomly. You can record yourself, and then you can record yourself play back while having the tuner going. So that if you're just like, well, let me see where the big outliers of my pitch are, not how well I play in tune any given note, but where is there like a huge swing? You can do that. You can add reverb to the recording if you need a little more self-esteem, like I usually do. So that's
Saves me
a
from
fun
practicing
one.
in the bathroom, so I can get that nice bathroom resonance.
Exactly. That's a big one. Huddle Technique, HUDL Technique. That's a sports app, but it's really cool for video recording, I think, and being able to mark angles if you want to get that sort of sciencey into it. Being able to take two recordings that you did like side by side if you're working on posture or something like that. Let's see. Decision Roulette. Do you know apps like that?
That sounds very cool.
It's
No, I don't know that
decision
one.
apps. So like I program them with all the scales in there. I do it mostly to torture my students, but then
We're like the same brain, because I once wanted to make an app called Practice Roulette, and I was going to put like scales in there, and you could add your level and but I never figured out how to write an app, so I never made it.
Oh yeah. So you should
I
look
could
on the
use this, eh?
Practisma website. I think
Okay.
on my website, on the practisma.com website are I can't remember what it's called, but it's like I don't know, recommendations, or there's some page that's for like resources.
Oh, I've seen that. The resources, yeah, your favorite things.
Something like that. And
Yeah.
there are some of my favorite apps I listed on there. And I can't remember if I linked them out, but you can find them. But Decision Roulette, it's just fun. You spin the wheel and then it goes to, whatever scale. And then you can, on some of them, you can program sounds. So I have hard keys kind of go, wah, 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 wah. I don't know. And that makes
That's
the
super
student
cool.
feel okay with like F sharp minor, which for us is really hard.
Yeah.
TW Recorder is like an easy recording app where with one button you can erase and one button you can record, which I find pretty handy for musicians because I don't want it to ask me, do you want to delete? Are you sure you want to delete? This cannot
Yeah.
be recovered. I don't want all that. I just want something easy.
Yes, of course I want to delete it.
Oh, and video delay, because we do a lot of mirror work. So video delay is like no sound, but just video, but on a delay. So you can look over and see what you just did,
It's interesting to me because it sounds like, maybe I've just been practicing wrong for 25 years, but it sounds like violin learning is much more visual than clarinet. I guess that makes sense because we don't look at our hands. So, outside of setting your posture.
Well, and you would have to see the inside of your mouth, but basically we can see, it would be the equivalent of you seeing the inside of your mouth, what happens with your tongue, but you can see how, you can see a lot of the parameters for how you're playing.
Well, I think a lot of beginners are encouraged to use mirrors, for example. So you can see your face, you can see if your fingers look like this. But after a certain point, like it's much more. I don't think you do that
Internal.
as much. Yeah, it's interesting. And one of the hardest parts, though, about teaching clarinet, though, obviously, is like you can't let me just look inside your face there and see, you know.
Yes, you have to essentially describe something that you're feeling on the
Yeah,
inside,
which
right?
doesn't
Yeah,
always
I think
work
it's
for
much harder.
everybody. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
so
much harder, I think.
what is currently on your music stand? What are you practicing right now?
Ooh, what am I doing? I'm doing a course, an online course with Nathan Cole, who's the assistant concert master of LA Phil. He's
Mm.
amazing, and that's giving me my structure. Basically, I paid a lot of money to have some structure. So he every 2 weeks we have like a piece that we have to learn within 6 days, and then record it and upload it to our Facebook group. It's a little Dardle. I don't think it's not a very well known composer, just a little ditty. And then I'm looking through some Bartok duos because I want to play with a friend. So I'm trying to go somewhere between sight reading and learning well, but
Hmm.
not much. I'm not practicing too much. I'm
Yeah,
practicing, but
that's
I'm not.
where I'm at right now too. I've just had trouble to
I'm
actually
in
bother.
maintenance
It's
mode.
so hard. Yeah,
I'm
because I
in
mean,
maintenance mode. You know.
yeah, it feels like the time I've got to practice, the baby's finally put down for a nap, and I am not going to spoil
Well,
that
small
time.
kids is like a whole nother level. I don't think. I mean, I don't know how I got through when my kids were younger. That's a whole nother level of
Yeah,
you know,
the
lowering
energy
your
is hilarious
expectations
that they have.
and
It's
then
like,
lowering them again,
yeah,
basically.
and then throwing them out the window. Um,
It'll get better. You'll come back to it. Don't worry.
well, it's funny you say that you're taking an online, class, even at your level. I find that super interesting. And I was recently reading a book by a guy named, I'm trying to get him on the podcast as well. His name is Sean Pratt, and he wrote a book called To Be Your Wannabe. It's actually for artists, or sorry, for actors. And everything in there is super relevant to musicians. Like if you want a book to read 10 times once a year or something, just to kind of stay on track, I think it'd be a great one. Super short too. It's like 3 hours,
Nice.
audio book I listened to. But he was talking about investing in R&D, because every corporation or big
Yes.
company invests in R&D, and if you're not setting aside part of your budget for R&D, then you're going to fail as an artist because you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
keep growing, right? So I took that to heart. I've actually booked a couple little online things myself over the coming months that I want to,
Yep.
they're
And for
courses
me,
that are a couple $100, but if I don't take them, I'm not going to
yeah,
learn that stuff.
it's accountability is part of it for me because it gives me something to practice for. But it is also I've just learned how I was talking earlier about sort of regulating our emotions and some most people have strength in certain things, right? Courage or being open minded, sense of humor. My strength, I think, is curiosity.
Mm,
And so I try to leverage that whenever I can. So when I'm learning new things, I'm highly engaged. I
yeah.
think it's like the coolest thing ever. I'm like, oh my God, I never thought about it this way. This is so cool. And I'll try things out and I'm very happy in that space. And when I have a lack of new ideas, I get bored. And
Yeah.
I so I try to book either now I can do an online course. It's amazing. But before like in March, wherever I go, I try to book a lesson. Like I was in Florida for a conference, so I just wrote the concertmaster of Florida Orchestra and like, hey, you don't know me, but I'm working on a concerto. Can I have a lesson? Blah blah blah. What's your rate? And like, boom, I'll just drop in. I'll do 2 hour lessons either in New York or wherever I am. Just like give me some new ideas. I need new ways about thinking about the same old stuff because we're all on a continuum, right? And
Yeah.
I need that external stimulus. I don't need it every week, but I do need it, once or twice a year for sure.
Well, and I don't want to
So
give
I still take
questionable
lessons.
business advice on here, or like tax advice or whatever. And I mean, but I have meant to do kind of a series on financial wellness for musicians. But by the way, for anyone listening, this can be a great way to write off trips that you might want to take. Like a couple years ago, I wanted to go see
Yeah.
a couple Radiohead concerts, and so I now have a Radiohead podcast, but so I can write it off anyways. But when I was there, I booked a few interviews with local clarinetists, and all of a sudden, this is a justifiable business expense from several standpoints, right? And you might think, oh, I don't want to worry about all that stuff, but when you get to a point where you do start paying taxes, these kind of things come right off your taxes.
Yeah.
Like you give it to the government or you invest in your trip. Like, what do you want to do, right?
And you can
So
have it stacked. So like the thing I do in New York mostly. So my best friend lives in New York. So I will, book let's say a 4 day stay. I book a lesson on the first day that I'm there, so as
then
not
you
to
can,
ruin my whole vacation, right? I feel that
yeah.
pressure. I go learn some new things. I'm very invigorated. I write off the trip, and then she and I have a good time.
Oh God, that is
And
such
that's
good
sort of my
advice.
formula.
Because I've done the
Yeah.
opposite before, and it was a huge mistake.
Oh no, don't do it at the end. That's very important. Then you'll be practicing the whole
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
And do make sure to do it. I remember another time I went on a trip, and my friend and I were planning on, like, I still did some recording and things, but we were planning originally to do like a bunch of concerts. So we went there together, and a couple weeks before, we were like, let's not do that anymore. So we had like an extra week of nothing after, and it was just kind of a weird, drawn out. We didn't want to change our
Zone.
flights, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, well, now we're getting really into the weeds, but this has been so great talking with you today, and I
Thank
do
you
wish
so
you
much. What a
great
great
success with
conversation.
this book for sure. So anyone listening, especially those who are here now live on YouTube, by the way, do let me know if you like this YouTube live concept. I think it's kind of cool to get to see, our guests in person, also to take part live with some people.
Yeah,
Um,
we need human contact. So even if just like three people watch it, to those three people,
Totally,
that could be
totally. No,
important.
we'll see. This will probably within a couple days. This will be will for sure be seen by a few hundred on YouTube, and then I'll get the podcast out at some point. But
Awesome.
I definitely recommend you check out this resource, Practisma, the Practice Journal. 16 weeks of. I'm trying to read it backwards. 16 weeks of efficiency, empowerment, and joy for musicians by Susanna Klein, who is of course our guest today. Now, one last question before we go.
Thank you so much.
Please tell me some of the best books that you would recommend, because I know you did reference a few times some books, and I know you're a reader
Ooh,
because you
yes.
said that I had read some books, or sorry, that you had read some books that I
Yes,
recommended. So
yes.
what's
So
your
I
maybe
think
top
also
five?
there's, they're also on my website. But if you're really into habit building, James Clear, Atomic Habits. Have you read it? I figured
No, but it's actually in
maybe
my
that's up
Audible
your.
library, I think.
Yes,
So
that's great.
I should actually listen to it.
I think most people know Carol Dweck, The Growth Mindset. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
education, but it's about what we should be building, the capacity that we should be building in students. Um, Neil Pasricha, who's kind of like a happiness meditation guy. I'm not describing it very well. Brené Brown, you probably know the vulnerability sort of
Mm-hmm.
person.
What's the book called?
I
Sorry.
follow. There would be several, but
Oh, okay.
she has a podcast too, which is amazing. But she's really into vulnerability as a kind of growth experience, which has really influenced me about being more honest about the practice discussion, about how difficult it is, and that really it's a space worth inhabiting, even though it's difficult. Do you know? Was it Gay Hendricks that you recommended or not? The Big Leap.
I don't think so, but that one
I
also
feel
does
like
sound
that would be
familiar.
up your. I feel like that would be up your alley for some reason. That's not for music. That's really more for figuring out sort of your life's calling.
Mm, the
Which
Big Leap.
I'm on like version 5 of my life's calling.
Yeah.
I don't. I've never read a book by his, but I've digested his website and listened to some podcasts. I'm really into the work of Tony Schwartz, who he works with organizations, but he's really about sort of balancing something positive with an opposite positive. So, like, let's say strength and vulnerability, or working hard and rest, as opposed to just like the way we conceive of it usually, which is working hard, being a slacker, right? Or like
Yeah.
being courageous,
Oh, but seeing
being
them
weak.
both is good thing. Oh, I see. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it was really fascinating to listen to him talk about it and then read a couple articles. So he says that for every positive, there is a positive opposite and there's a negative opposite. And most of us spend all our time running from the negative opposite when we should be holding two things in balance. And that to me really
Such an
influenced me
interesting
about
perspective.
practice.
I think that just blew my mind a little bit because every day lately I've got so much to do. When it comes time to quit for the day, I don't look at it as, okay, I need to rest now so I can get good at doing stuff tomorrow. I always see it as, oh God, I wish there was 4 more hours. I'm such
Yeah.
a failure. I can't get all this done. I have to go waste time sleeping.
Right. But see that he says that any strength overused is a liability. So actually, when you work all the time and don't cultivate, let's say, rest or renewal, as he calls it, what will that strength, if you overuse it, will lead to burnout,
Interesting.
right? And
I think
not
that's
feeling
relevant
any
for a lot of
love.
people right now.
And somehow that once I kind of took that also into the practice space and like the psychology of practice and how we sort of burn ourselves out and we're trying to do so much and blah blah. Well, no wonder we kind of shut down sometimes and we can't feel the joy actually of music. So that is somebody who just really influenced the way that he talks about things, even though he's not in the music space at all. Actually, none of these are in the music space.
Well, that's so interesting, and this is why I love this podcast. Is I think that it's not just well, it's so modest, but I love it for because the
Yeah,
reason I started it was to gain myself really from things and share that with others. And I hope that other people, anyways, have these kind of moments too, where they learn
no,
something.
you should love it because you're
super
kind
interesting.
of you expand, the ability. I mean, you do some very clarinety, super nerdy things. Not nerdy, nerdy. But with reeds and etc. But you also kind of expand the box a little bit. You know what I mean? Of let's conceptualize music and what it means to be a musician and an entrepreneur and a teacher, and like let's just widen the box actually.
And it is
also
funny
the fact that you don't need to choose. You don't need to, oh, I'm an amateur, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a whatever. Like it was never like that, but somehow I think a lot of people talk about it like that, especially when you're going through school. You feel like that's the way it's going to be, and it's not.
Yeah, and that's something interesting too. You touch on briefly here is that other people's expectations. You have to be careful sometimes not to let them shape your own. Like I've caught a lot of flack in the past for this show sometimes. Like, oh well, it's it's too entrepreneurial, or it's too focused around like music business or this and that and blah blah blah. It's like, well then don't listen to that episode. Like I don't understand.
Wow. So people will actually say that, or
oh God, yeah. I mean, I get people writing me all the time. It's funny because you were saying earlier that never start something that on social media because people won't comment about it. I mean, so I started these online lessons early on in the pandemic, but I just decided I didn't have time for it after about 3 or 4 of them. And every week I'd say 2 or 3 people messaged me, and even while we were right on the show here, I got an email popped up. Someone just said, "Oh, there's only 3 classes. I really like them. Any chance there'll be more?" So yeah, people they end up holding you accountable for that stuff. But that person's right. Actually, I'd love to do more of them.
Yeah, but the thing is, the great thing, like the value of the podcast, isn't that every single episode speak to each person. Like let's say I were to listen to all of them.
Yeah.
The idea isn't that every single one is like, oh my God, this changed my life. But the idea is that, every few you get that one that really speaks to you, but the other one, the next one, will really speak to somebody else who also plays the clarinet. Because it's that diversity and that breadth that I think is really
well, and someone else asked me once why I don't have on people who are always like the most burnished, professional top level performers. And it's called clarinet, not, whatever that is. I mean, like I want to talk about anything that's neat to do with clarinet. Like I've had beginner people on who are, I won't say beginner, but like they're just fresh graduates. I want to learn their perspective too, and anything that's neat with the clarinet is kind of what this is
about. And it's about
the
journey. I mean, essentially it's about the journey. That's what the podcast is sort of about. It's not about, oh, okay, the end product, here's like an amazing clarinet player, let's hear what their perspective on life is. That can be one of them, but that's why I also kind of reached out to you and said like, hey,
I appreciate that, and I love
like to talk about practice because you do lots of different things, which I love that.
Yeah, and I love that people like you find it and are not only willing to contact me, but I can get to see this great book, and we spend some time, and
that's awesome.
I get to share with my listeners. So yeah, well, thank you so much. Out of respect for your time, I realize we went on for a little bit longer than planned, but thanks so much for coming on. And this will air on the actual podcast in hopefully a couple of weeks. And for those here on YouTube who got the early preview, thanks so much for joining. And be sure to tap that subscribe icon because I'm giving away a Bakun surprise mystery box at 2,000, or I'll be announcing it at 2,500 subscribers. So I didn't just say that. But I'll be giving it away at 10,000 subscribers. So tap that subscribe button, make a new account, subscribe again, send it to 10 friends, subscribe, etc. And you won't hear all the full ads on the podcast here. You'll hear those on the real version, but I do just want to give a reminder that these t-shirts, I just got this new store up, clarinetshirts.com. You get 10% off with code clarinet. And we're going to chat afterwards about maybe I'm going to talk to Susanna here and see if we can make this available in Canada somehow and get more people into this practice.
I have a digital version, but I know I need to.
Well, there's a digital one too. So head to her website, practisma.com.
I made that after the pandemic because like
people weren't ordering.
People wanted it, but they didn't actually want to touch anything. So, but
they'll touch their iPads. So yeah, download the digital version. I didn't know that was available. So website practisma.com. You can get this beautiful paperback edition, which is actually this is really nice paper. I'm actually impressed by the quality, but you can get a buddy pack for 2 people. I think I saw 5 or 6, but I must have not scrolled down far enough to see the digital copy there, but you can buy this on her website. So Thank you so
Awesome.
much,
Thank
Susanna,
you.
for coming on the show, and best of luck, everyone, practicing with your new Practisma book.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on.